Aqua friends, welcome to my channel. Today I thought I would challenge myself to do a one-layer painting so that we could paint these cute little pumpkins for our Fast and Fun series. So I am just lightening up my lines. I free sketched the pumpkins, and if you like your sketching lines to show through, you don't have to do this step, but I just wanted to go a little bit lighter. With the one-layer painting, we are going to do these little guys individually as they are different colors, and we're working wet on wet. So I am just getting my first pumpkin really nicely wet. Sometimes a trick is to lift up your paper if you're not sure if you missed any spots, and you can see the sheen of the water on your paper, so it does help. Then make sure you got everything nice and wet. So that's why I'm lifting up my paper there. All right, so starting with this first color, I have quinacridone gold mixed with some other yellows, just whatever I had on my palette. And I'm starting off with those lines, kind of like those spines of the pumpkin. And notice how nicely it's dispersing. So drawing in those three-dimensional shapes right off the bat by putting in those areas. Now all these pumpkins are very nicely speckled. So they're like a very fun project to do. So where I'm doing the speckled parts, I have a very light hand. I'm barely touching the paper. And as you're working on this first pumpkin, your paper will start drying, and you will be able to add in some darker colors. Okay, using your brush on the dry side, because you might create blooms otherwise. As your paper's drying, and if you add more water to it, you'll create these blooms, which they're called backruns, cauliflowers. It is a cool effect in watercolor, but sometimes you don't always want that effect. So my paper is drying a lot. You could tell because the new lines that I'm putting on this pumpkin are not dispersing quite as much. They're just, you know, a nice fuzzy line. If you guys are enjoying my channel, please think about subscribing and hitting the notification button so that you don't miss any of my videos. I post every Tuesday, and I try to get a fast project out on Fridays. So adding more depth of color down the middle of those spine areas. And it's still nice and soft. They're not hard lines, but they're not spreading as much, and so you're getting more definition. So just adding all those like little ticks that I see, all those little imperfection, little marks. These tiny hashtaggy type marks. It is actually nice to be able to get a painting done within a half hour with one layer and not having to go back for a second layer. As you know, I love layers because I love realism and I'm a tight painter. But it's nice to do a quick study just to, uplift your mood, just to relax and just have fun with it. Okay, moving on to the green pumpkin. The green pumpkin does have a yellowish tinge in the background, so kind of have some like dirty water on my brush that's yellow from the first pumpkin, and actually works as a very good base color to start this pumpkin. So I'm just getting this one really good and wet, and we're just going to repeat the same process. The colors that I used for this green pumpkin was sap green mixed with a little bit of hooker's green, and for the darkest areas I did use some shadow green. But really, whatever green you have would work just fine. Starting off getting those lines in, and always painting in the direction that the pumpkin's shape is. So getting these nice C curves in. Redoing my speckles for this one in the same manner. So again, it's drying and I'm able to add more paint that is darker. So getting that more three-dimensional look now. I picked up some of my darker green of that area in the front. As you see in the reference photo, is pretty dark. So now I'm just moving the paint around that I already had on there. lightening up that last squash. Now this squash is a very smooth texture, there's no speckles on it really, and it's a very pale color. I used yellow ochre for this, and I think raw sienna. And then for the three-dimensional effect, it's mostly lifting some highlights on this last pumpkin. Squash, pumpkin, whatever. This one definitely looks like a squash. Kind of reminds me of a spaghetti squash a little bit. Now, also I'll mention, to prevent your pumpkin that's drying to not bleed into the new area that you wet, not to bleed into the pumpkin that's drying and create blooms. When you're wetting your paper, you want to leave the tiniest sliver so that the wetness isn't touching that pumpkin at all. So that is a very important thing to tell you about. So these little imperfections and the shadows on this, I used just whatever browns that I had in my palette, and with a little bit of burnt sienna, because those areas are a little on the warmer note. This color that I'm using now is the ISO yellow. I love that color. It's like one of my favorite colors to use. It just has a very, very nice vibrancy. So now I'm lifting. So just with I like to use a flat brush, just anything I found at Michael's. It's a little on the stiff side, makes a fantastic watercolor scrubbing brush. So you can also use a little piece of tissue, but that took way too much off, so I had to fill it back in. Shaping this pumpkin with the warmer colors. And lifting out those highlights again. Now that I got the pumpkin the color I wanted to get it. And adding in those little spots. So now I'm adding the shadows underneath these little pumpkins. And I'm just using whatever I had in my palette. I think it's a very warm shadow, so I'm using like browns, sepia, a little bit of neutral tint. So before I'm putting the shadow underneath the pumpkins, I'm also wetting it. Okay, so this will create a nice soft shadow for us. The shadow, of course, is going to be the darkest right underneath these pumpkins. Blending it out so it's softer. Picking up paint with my rag. And for the last part, just the stems of the pumpkin. Using a combination of greens and browns. And these little areas I'm just doing wet on dry. Okay, using the green as an underpainting. And that is it, folks. Cute little study on these pumpkin squashes. I hope you enjoyed it and give it a try. Let me know in the comments what you think.